When thinking of the most influential creators in YouTube's history, it's hard to not envision MatPat on that list. He went from humble beginnings of making episodes of his show Game Theory as a one-man band to running the massive multi-million-dollar Theorist empire, which he would go on to sell for a hefty sum of money. The thing is, this 15-year journey wasn't always easy, as he would contend with round after round of criticism and hate over his content, which I think nowadays many people forgot about, even though it was a huge deal back at the time. I was honestly shocked to see no one has made a large breakdown of the many twists and turns of Matt's career. Since my channel in a way ran perpendicularly to his, as I also made gaming theory videos all the way back in 2011, a lot of the information I pulled up really brought me down memory lane. I had to laugh as some of the drama people took so seriously in the community a decade ago seems so quaint in retrospect. Still, I find it extremely entertaining as a time capsule of the internet of yesteryear. So with that being said, let's explore the long, winding tale of game theory and its mastermind. But before we go any further, I just want to give a big shout out to today's sponsor, Mint Mobile. Mint is premium wireless without the premium price tag. Instead of continuing to overpay for your old plan because that's always what it's cost, consider switching over to get a lot of savings. That's because their plans start at $15 a month, and all of them include unlimited talk and text on the nation's largest 5G network. Plus, you get free calling to Mexico, Canada, and the United Kingdom. And on top of that, you get a hotspot with 20 gigabytes of data on their unlimited plans. Don't think you're making any concessions on coverage either, as their 5G covers 98% of Americans and their 4G LTE covers 99% of Americans. So if you want to try it out for yourself, you could sign up and activate in minutes with an eSIM from the comfort of your home. And it's so seamless because 96% of users rate themselves as highly satisfied with Mint's customer care. And all of this comes with a 7-day unconditional money-back guarantee. So if you like your money, Mint Mobile is for you. Shop plans at mintmobile.com/TGFM. That's mintmobile.com/TGFM. Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month 5 GB plan required, equivalent to $15 a month. New customer offer for first 3 months only. Then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See Mint Mobile for details. Matthew Robert Patrick was born on November 15, 1986 in Medina, Ohio. He was given the nickname MatPat in 6th grade, remarking,
"It seems so obvious after the fact."
As an only child, he credited his early interest in gaming to his upbringing. The earliest memories he had were of his Mario-themed bedroom and playing Castlevania, meaning video games had been a part of his life for literally as long as he could remember. However, it would be a long time before they were the focus. These humble Midwest beginnings inspired a dream for more, eventually sparking a lifelong passion for performance.
In the Midwest, when surrounded by cornfields, you have two options: sports or show choir. My glasses naturally dictated that I avoid option 1, so I got involved in theater. Really involved.
The high schooler went on to sing in 5 different choruses, played viola in the orchestra, and became both president and dance captain, all while performing in around 6 stage shows a year. An unabashed nerd, he loved school, overloading on classes because of how much he enjoyed learning. His summers were spent taking extra lessons on college campuses. The hard work would pay off, with MatPat graduating in 2005 as the valedictorian of his class. He also received a full academic scholarship to Duke University, enrolling later that year. Patrick recalled college came and went without too much excitement. In line with his overachieving nature, he pursued a double major in theater and psychology, with a focus in neuroscience as his backup plan. Despite the workload, he still found ways to keep gaming as a part of his life. That spring, MatPat enrolled in a video game programming course. It was there he'd meet his future wife and collaborator, Stephanie. Though for the first 6 months they knew each other, she thought he was a homosexual.
Oh, and she totally thought I was this for like the first half year that we knew each other.
Throughout the semester, Steph and Matthew competed to create the best game in their class. For the course's final project, they teamed up to make a Legend of Zelda parody called The Epic of Stu, with Stu being a combination of both their names. In 2006, Patrick studied abroad through Duke at Oxford University. Afterward, he served as a resident assistant to freshmen for 3 years, hosting Fondue Friday game nights where they played Zelda and DDR. On the academic side, MatPat was inducted into Phi Beta Kappa, America's oldest and most prestigious academic honor society. He graduated in 2009 with the highest academic honors, earning both his bachelor's degrees. To fulfill his dream of becoming an actor, Patrick moved to New York to start auditioning. He spent about 2 years touring in stage productions. In fact, the earliest videos on his channel are clips of him auditioning for and performing in various theater shows, including Sweeney Todd and Bram Stoker's Dracula. But despite working constantly, the starving actor was barely able to scrape by. It quickly grew apparent that theater wasn't the life he imagined it to be. The last straw dropped near the end of 2010 with the disastrous Spider-Man Turn Off the Dark. On top of the negative reviews, risky maneuvers and safety violations led to multiple on-set accidents. Disillusioned with the state of the industry, Matt found himself at a crossroads. Theater had been his calling since preschool, his destiny, yet he now felt lost. He knew he needed to change, but wasn't sure how. It didn't help that his other major was more about bragging rights than a legitimate backup plan.
Well, let's be honest here, it was just cool to say, hey, I'm majoring in neuroscience.
He applied for what he considered creative, innovative companies to little success. They didn't care about his perfect grades, extracurriculars, or what working as a director actually meant.
I was just the weird theater kid with no real skills in their mind.
At first, he didn't get it, naively assuming they'd love to hire a fresh, independent thinker. He tried finding work in video games, movies, televisions, sending resumes out every day and hearing nothing back. Things got desperate as MatPat remained unemployed for nearly 2 years.
I went from the guy who breezed through life, who was born and raised to think, and indeed fully believed, that he was capable of doing anything, to questioning my worth, my smarts, my reason for being.
Because of this, he was surprisingly drawn to YouTube of all things out of desperation.
Recognizing that my theater experience was meaningless, I needed a resume booster. Something that I could point to and say, hey, look, I can research and video edit and do math and understand the internet culture.
It must be considered that YouTube was a much simpler landscape than it is today. The first video Let's Play was made by user Slowbeef in early 2007. These were initially hosted on a variety of sites, but eventually it became standard to host them on YouTube. That unexpectedly brought them to a broader audience, with names like Chugga Conroy, Nintendo Capri Sun, and Proton John netting tens of millions of views. Another early success for MatPat to observe was the angry video game nerd, who would pioneer the angry reviewer genre. Instead of network executives, these creators were gamers themselves, independently making the kind of videos they wanted to see. This all coincided with the launch of YouTube's partner program, which let eligible creators monetize their videos for the first time. With that said, it was still rather exclusive. Even a show like AVGN made most of its revenue by partnering with sites like Screw Attack and Game Trailers, premiering new episodes off-platform. Zero Punctuation, for example, skyrocketed the Escapist traffic by 394%, leading them to hire Ben Yahtzee Crenshaw full-time. The Escapist would eventually expand their roster to include Movie Bob, as well as a student project that eventually became known as Extra Credits. Extra Credits began airing weekly on The Escapist in the summer of 2010. It was refreshing to hear someone engage with video games in an analytical manner, and perhaps more importantly, take the medium seriously. This brings us to 2011. That March, Extra Credits released its 35th episode focusing on tangential learning, how games can teach us while we play.
Tangential learning is not what you learn by being taught. Rather, it's what you learn by being exposed to things in a context which you're already engaged in. It's the idea that some portion of your audience will self-educate if you can introduce them to topics in a context they already find exciting and engaging.
The reason I went on this tangent of gaming content on YouTube is because MatPat would cite this episode as the impetus for game theory. It made a light bulb go off in his head. Why not create a show that fused education and gaming, using discussion of the latter to teach? For weeks he studied other popular video game web series, analyzing everything from their logos and color scheme to their pace and editing style.
My apartment was echoey, so I recorded in the closet. So yes, as fate would have it, I would eventually come out of the closet.
Game Theory was announced on April 14th with an official promotional teaser.
That's right, Weboverse. Inspired by fellow gaming series extra credits found here, we have created Game Theory, gaming's tangential learning experience.
Unable to afford a proper camera or game capture device, he made do with whatever images he could find online. The only software he had were the built-in tools on his computer. This led to a fast-paced, visual-driven style where images appear in rapid succession to illustrate and reinforce the narration. Game Theory's inaugural episode released later that week, discussing time travel and quantum mechanics through the 1995 role-playing game Chrono Trigger. Desperate, MatPat poured everything into the channel. It was a way to feel productive during a time of rejection and self-doubt. When he needed a break from sending out resumes, he practiced editing, showing off a new trick every episode. The first wave of videos accomplished exactly what it set out to do, hitting a diverse cross-section of subjects. It helped that the show could pretty much cover anything it wanted. You could get a history lesson, a video about animals or the Earth. Sometimes it leaned Mythbusters, trying to gauge the plausibility of video game logic. Or you'd get more playful theorizing, like inferring Mario's actual nationality through in-game context clues. The series slowly took off, in part thanks to his frequent upload schedule. A particularly popular episode was his analysis of Earthbound, which currently sits at over 6 million views. MatPat regularly took on viewer suggestions, letting them help shape the show. Fans started to submit components that were beyond his capabilities. Easily the most significant was from Spelling Failure, who created both the logo as well as the now beloved opening theme, Science Blaster. By the summer, Game Theory was being featured on sites like Reviewtopia, The Punk Effect, Screw Attack, and Game Trailers. It was around this time the now engaged couple moved to Los Angeles, where from August to December he worked as a freelancer at GNet, contributing to the marketing campaigns of AAA games. Game Theory started 2012 with just under 2,000 subs. Over the following year it amassed over 45,000. A major difference was the channel expanding to include other shows with a similar niche. The first was Ronnie Edwards, host of Digressing and Sidequesting. Ronnie focused on game design and the history of specific mechanics. He was brought on as MatPat's first editor, establishing the show's signature visual style that lives on to this day. The next was Gaijin Goomba, who bridged gaming with cultural history.
I like big goons and I can't lie.
Matt and Stephanie helped Gaijin rebrand his show, coming up with the name Game Exchange. These new programs kept the channel active, which helped them stay in the algorithm and keep fans engaged. Another tactic Matt employed that feels a bit uncharacteristically tacky now was his use of sexy clickbait. A product of early YouTube, many early Game Theory thumbnails feature scantily clad women, including an entire episode dedicated to the best boobs in gaming.
Oh no! Oh no!
Oh,
No! No!
Oh no! Oh no! Don't go there! Oh no! Oh no!
After years of being called the gay theater kid at school, he had finally proved them wrong. In a similar vein, he never shied away from taboo topics like religion, racism, or sexism.
Mario games aren't platformers. They also disempower women and promote organized crime.
One episode I remember vividly from back in the day was his video about Polybius. He used the premise to discuss the CIA's MK Ultra experiments in which they secretly drugged American civilians with LSD. That was an interesting topic to cover in 2012 and allowed him to expand a very minimal urban legend into a bigger video. With all that said, the channel wouldn't see its first real breakout success until the very end of the year. On December 1st, MatPat uploaded "How Fast is Sonic the Hedgehog?" While he'd later state this theory had been cooking in his head for months, it was a direct response to a video by Jake of Vsauce 3 a month prior. Jake sought to explore how fast Sonic really was, and what effect traveling at the speed of sound would have on his body. MatPat argued Jake's estimations were wrong. Using information and calculations only from the games, he concluded that the blue blur was much slower than stated and could only travel a fourth of the speed of sound. It ends with the revelation that Robotnik can actually outrun Sonic, making him the truest, fastest thing alive. Within months, it had become his most popular episode to date. Interestingly, there was tension behind the scenes over this upload. You see, Vsauce 3 had only existed for a few months at this point. The channel launched with game theory adjacent subjects like how much are Mario's coins worth and could Cloud Sword be real? They went viral, each netting over 1 million views. Within months, they had surpassed 350,000 subscribers, 3 times the amount MatPat had after a year of weekly uploads. Matt would later confess that he feared his channel was now dead in the water due to the encroaching risk of the much bigger Vsauce brand.
But when their next big one, The Science of Sonic the Hedgehog, rolled out and covered similar topics to a video I had done 1 year earlier, I felt like my format, my style of show had been stolen and that my channel was going to die.
Game Theory's rebuttal was an attempt to stick his flag in the ground, dig his heels in, and claim the theorist's niche. Of course, everything worked out in the end, and we now realize multiple people can be in the same genre. AVGN and Irate Gamer are now friends. Today, Game Theory has nearly 5 times the amount of subs as Vsauce 3. It's a relic of a bygone era when MatPat was the underdog against the YouTube behemoth. By the fall of 2013, the game theorist surpassed 500,000 subs. To celebrate, he got personal and made a Draw My Life. He originally planned to end it by thanking every subscriber by name, only to realize this would take at least 416 hours, and Mr. Beast didn't exist yet to prove that was viable. Less than 2 months later, they passed 1 million followers. New GT episodes easily garnered multi-million views, and the other shows weren't far behind. The trio were more than colleagues, hosting live streams and even a game theory panel together at that year's SGC. Though reception to the game theorists was so far overwhelmingly positive, this popularity would coincide with some of the earliest criticisms against their work, as people would become irrationally invested. The first theory to fall under scrutiny was a video he made attempting to determine the gender of Pyro from Team Fortress 2. Unlike other characters from the game, the mercenary's face is fully concealed. This fueled endless speculation over who or what could actually be under the mask. I actually made a video about this subject myself back in 2012, delving into the evidence for and against the Pyro being a woman.
The Pyro is a popular character in the Team Fortress games, but who exactly is he? Or she? So hey, I'm TheGamerFromMars, and this is the Pyro Theory.
Well, in March of 2013, MatPat decided to take on the mystery himself. In contrast to previous interpretations, which he argued relied on stereotypes, the flamboyant gamer would instead favor a so-called scientific approach. Rather than in-game clues, he researched sexual dimorphism, the physical differences between men and women. One of the main arguments would end up being ratio digit theory, the observation that the relative length of someone's index finger compared to their ring finger on average tell you if that person is a guy or a girl. It's supposedly affected by how much testosterone you were exposed to in the womb. At first glance, the Pyro's fingers were extremely similar to that of a woman, but it wasn't that simple, as he then reveals homosexual men also have similarly sized fingers. Now you can probably already see a few problems with this. Firstly, it undoubtedly led millions of children around the world to frantically check their own fingers to see if they were gay. However, the biggest oversight had nothing to do with science at all. That's because the pyro is wearing gloves, which are usually made to fit different hand sizes, making the whole finger part of the theory void. Still, many ran with it, trusting his use of the scientific method, a problem that only grew more prevalent over time. That June, he decided to tackle rocket physics with Wario's Fartwaft. Because an official height measurement for the Nintendo character didn't exist, he tried to calculate it himself by comparing different 3D models. This use of the pixel height measurements led him to the conclusion that Wario was over 10 feet tall.
I was able to find that by comparison, Wario is practically 10 feet tall, or, for the metrically minded, just over 3 meters.
Not only does this just not sound right on its face, he then applies it to Super Smash Bros., which is notorious for ignoring canonical height measurements. This was such a glaring discrepancy that the phrase, "Wario is 10 feet tall," became a meme. It was one of the very first mistakes he'd own up to on the channel, with the flub becoming a reoccurring gag in the series.
And what are the two things Wario is known for? Being 10 feet tall. Shut up. Being fat and being greedy.
This didn't stop future uses of pixel height measurements though, which were consistently unreliable, but sometimes all he could do to flesh out the video concept. It may not seem like that big of a deal, because it's not, but people kept harping on it because they were desperate for reasons to undermine Matt's credibility. In hindsight, we could laugh at the more absurd theories like Mario was a communist, but at the time, many took his word as gospel. He was viewed with a level of authority by his young fans because, after all, he was making educational content. Even the most absurd claims were treated like canon by many of his fans, and discussions quickly became dominated by them. This annoyed people who preferred the actual lore of the game, like when he claimed Rosalina was Luigi and Peach's daughter from the future, something completely contradicted by the few canonical materials that exist. To keep this a little bit more positive, I actually liked his video about the companion cube from Portal. He theorizes they contain the bodies of dead test subjects. It's an interesting idea, but how he frames the evidence can warp how people view the story. For example, the character Doug Ratman is canonically schizophrenic, while MatPat argues he isn't schizophrenic due to inconsistencies with objectum sexual. Because his claims are framed as scientific, they carry an air of legitimacy that can blur the line between speculation and facts, ultimately spreading misinformation about real-world subjects beyond the game itself. Imagine all the 12-year-olds watching his pyro video, then going around transvestigating in public by looking at finger lengths. Game theory being labeled as an education channel with the host proclaiming his degree in neuroscience comes with responsibility. Obviously this wasn't that big of a deal, but in the much smaller YouTube of the time, people took it seriously and gave weight to the analysis. What people lost sight of was that above all else, the primary motive of game theory was to be entertaining. Making a two-part series about why Mario has antisocial personality disorder is exactly that. At his best, you'd get unique ideas that taught you something. Maybe Star Fox pilots don't have legs for greater resistance to G-force. At his worst, you'd get a poorly thought out video that only exists because he needed to make a theory about a trendy game. After all, MatPat now had a quota, and consequently many felt like he began grasping at straws. Even his own fans started to dismiss theories for having too many holes and invoking concepts like genetics. This fell on deaf ears though, because they were still performing extremely well. Before long, people began to expect obtuse or abstract theories from them, so they'd come up with whatever, and it worked. TV Tropes started a page about the show's critical research failures, and if I went through all of the minor errors, I'd be here all day, and it wouldn't be interesting. How people fanatically nitpick these YouTube videos about fake game characters got to the point of seeming obsessive. By far the most notable critic of game theory during this era was the YouTuber by the name of Noggin. Run by Austin Lockston Lockwood, he uploaded similar videos theorizing about games. They were clearly derived from MatPat given the shared phrasing of certain titles. In March of 2014, Lockwood uploaded his first rebuttal to game theory highlighting the issues with his video about Pyro's gender. He would go on to debunk the infamous Wario's 10 feet tall video. But he wouldn't really gain traction until tackling one of Mr. Patrick's earliest crowning works, How Fast is Sonic? Noggin points out several glaring errors. Firstly, using classic Sonic's height for modern Sonic games. The next came down to math. While analyzing the Hedgehog's speed, Matt forgot to account for the fact that Sonic can move left or right without losing speed. This means if you calculated the distance diagonally, he would be faster.
This would mean that he can keep up with his speed of 80 meters per second while moving an extra distance left or right. After all, a squared plus b squared equals c squared.
This video would receive 700,000 views, and Noggin was able to articulate a feeling many had with the series, that the research was fallible and MatPat presented things with confidence that were wrong. Whereas most disputes over canon were subjective, this was an objective, factual error about Sonic. His channel became the de facto place for game theory haters and criticism, reflecting an unstated feeling among the public. As one snarky commenter would point out, "Finally, a decent counter-argument to game theory. With all the people using bogus math and lame excuses, I was worried nobody was even bothering to actually give real evidence anymore." Flame wars frequently broke out in game theory's comments using Noggin to discredit theories they didn't like. Looking at posts around this time, there was a widespread sentiment that Matt couldn't handle criticism. They argued he and his fans would lean on "it's just a theory" when proven wrong. Loxton uploaded several videos refuting or talking about the show in a meta sense. In April, he collaborated with another YouTuber to discuss the indirect consequences of game theory, most of which I've largely already discussed here. Noggin quickly made a name for himself, with some of his original theories surpassing 1 million views. He was once added to a list of game theorists on Wikipedia under MatPat, and his channel now sits over 1 million subs. Noggin showed that videos criticizing these flaws were tenable, and soon creators from other fandoms arose to refute Matt's claims about series like Zelda, Metroid, and Mega Man, to varying levels of quality. Nintendo fanboys specifically were swift to debunk popular theories they found unsavory.
Oh boy, Mario's mental. I'm guessing that 90% of you saw this coming and the other 10% didn't think I would put this one on because I'd already talked about it. But no, I freaking hate this video.
With all this being said, much of the haters' mounting dissent came less from Matthew's inaccuracies and more from the perception of his success. Over the next few years, the Game Theorist channel amassed 5 million subscribers, becoming one of the biggest gaming accounts on the platform. By then, they'd expanded to include the spin-off channel Film Theory, but few truly understood just how deep he was in studying the algorithm. As he became more invested in YouTube, Mr. Patrick started to put those years of AP math to work, crunching the data to find new ways to reach people. His first gig was at Big Frame, a media company specialized for the growing platform. Matt was initially brought on as a senior data analyst before getting promoted to lead of audience development. There, he'd reverse engineer the algorithm, refine AdWords to earn 20% more per subscriber, and develop search engine optimization strategy. Looking back, it's hard not to compare his goal to Mr. Beast, studying how to best tailor content to the algorithm and engineer virality. This creativity turned into a calculated science. He studied the most popular creators, namely PewDiePie, and just like Mr. Beast, uploaded videos about his findings.
Gather round, all you bros and non-bros, as I tell you the secrets to becoming the world's most popular gamer.
MatPat left Big Frame to work at Break Media, where he supervised the company's 20 core creators. This included Screen Junkies, as well as the then second largest channel on the platform, Smosh. He achieved an all-time high of gaining 50,000 subscribers in one day. Not many people realized yet just how much money there was to be made. Around the same time, Disney would end up acquiring Maker Studios, while Big Frame was bought by DreamWorks. Break Media had merged with Alloy Digital to form Defy Media, where Matt became Content Strategy Director, until leaving in August of 2014 to form his own company with Stephanie called Theorist Media, though MatPat would remain partnered with Defy as his channel MCN even after the split. While this was largely behind the scenes, it wasn't lost on viewers that he began applying these techniques to his channel. It may seem strange now given how openly people talk about gaming the algorithm. When he didn't ask me anything on Reddit, the top comment, which remained unanswered, read, "How do you usually respond to people who accuse you of being a sellout?" But the biggest shift in public perception came with the release of a little-known indie game by the name of Five Nights at Freddy's, which was released on August 8th, 2014.
Was that the bite of 87?
Five Nights at Freddy's was created by a small-time indie game developer named Scott Cawthon. With limited information on the horror game story, it was ripe for speculation, with people attempting to piece together all the clues into a cohesive narrative. MatPat made his first video about the series that October, when FNAF was still at its humble beginnings. Scrutinizing in-game paychecks, he narrows the setting as taking place between 1991 and 1996. This was used to support his claim that it was based on a real-life massacre, the 1993 Aurora, Colorado shooting. Just like the game, 19-year-old Nathan Dunlap murdered 5 people at Chuck E. Cheese's. Delays in the shooter's sentencing led to extensive coverage of the story in 2013. In retrospect, most dismissed the theory as unlikely, although this notion of the game being based on a true story undoubtedly helped it build mystique. And with this, the indie darling grew more and more viral. Five Nights at Freddy's 2 released a month later, and its new direction distanced itself from those potential real-world origins. This is truly where the rabbit hole of clues and suggested timelines began. The main antagonist, then only known as Purple Guy, became the subject of intense speculation. MatPat weighed in at the end of the year when he claimed to have solved gaming's scariest story. A brief aside, but this was the start of the show's modern thumbnail style with the bright green text. The video was also well received, and many commended him for providing much needed clarity on the lore. The game's creator, Mr. Cawthon himself, even praised the video, stating he had gotten almost everything right. The third entry in the series dropped on March 3, 2015, with the fourth and so-called final chapter set for that summer. In the meantime, MatPat published a 2-parter about the latest mysteries, though it was technically split into 3 videos. Due to a copyright strike, he couldn't upload videos longer than 15 minutes, so this was his workaround. FNAF was now a worldwide sensation, and Matt was a significant role in its success. The cycle of new games being put out and fans combing over all the clues was a unique experience that kept people at the edge of their seats. These game theory videos received from 20 to 35 million views apiece. Cawthon once again admitted the community had uncovered the third game story. However, when Part 4 arrived, MatPat's interpretations started to differ from the community's consensus.
Sorry, Scott Cawthon. I'm tired of waiting for you. This time you'll have to keep up with me.
He discusses frontal lobe injuries, stating the in-universe bite of 87 wasn't possible.
Just when it looked like you were making a game that actually adhered to its own lore, you also made a game that is completely impossible from a scientific perspective.
Most controversial was his assertion of the dream theory, which some claim did irreversible damage to the game's reputation. Scott would go on the record to state in response that no one had found the pieces and the story remained completely hidden. Scott left his first comment on the GT channel in light of Part 4. It was a good video, MatPat. I always enjoy them. Unfortunately, as your more clever viewers are pointing out in the comments below, you overlooked a crucial detail in the game. I'll be looking forward to your next theory. MatPat would address this in the subsequent episode, Why FNAF Will Never End.
I have a confession, Internet. I made a mistake. I was wrong in calling this the bite of 87. I'm man enough to admit my mistakes. Hey, it's why they're called theories after all, right? Anyway, in this case, Scott was sure to let me know my error in his first comment on any of my videos on the franchise to my knowledge, which was really exciting, but it did leave me wondering, should I feel honored or trolled?
Indeed, Five Nights at Freddy's didn't conclude, with the franchise still going on to this very day. Over the years, MatPat created a total of 67 videos solely about the game. Nowadays, it's commonly accepted that the actual intentions behind the overarching plot were tenuous. It was never really intended to be a series until the first game blew up. Some have gone so far as to accuse Scott of making it up as he went along, something akin to discovery writing, where he left a ton of loose threads and figured he'd make it all make sense later on. It's very well possible that Cawthon was watching game theory, reading what the community thought, and then writing the story. This includes vaguely saying he retconned something from the first 4 games, though never clarifying what. At the time, people assumed he had a grander vision and thus put greater scrutiny onto MatPat's theories. MatPat used to be pretty entertaining and informative. Now it's just clickbaiting, algorithm abusing nonsense. I hate the smug pictures he uses of himself, especially when he photoshops it to make him look more smug. Personally, I just dislike his phrase, "that's just a theory." No, it's not. It's a hypothesis, a guess based on cherry-picked observations. And theory isn't just theory, it is all we have in science. It diminishes the value of a scientific theory. That doesn't excuse what he did or how bad his content is. Hate what the channel became. Genuinely, I don't know what cardinal sin MatPat committed to get such indignant comments, besides maybe getting something wrong about Five Nights at Freddy's 4. As an aside, Noggin would end up unlisting his videos about game theory around this time. This came after MatPat's response to the React World drama when the Fine Bros tried to trademark the brand name React. Matt opened up about his fears as a smaller creator, such as his run-in with Vsauce 3. Noggin related to this and uploaded a heartfelt apology to MatPat while telling off all the commenters that were there for drama.
Stop it, YouTube. It's not even YouTube's fault. Stop it, comment section. Stop it, viewers. Drama, while a part of life, doesn't need to be in every part of life.
This video has since been set to private. Loxton has since pivoted to only making videos about Pokemon. In 2016, Matthew was declared the king of fan theories, even though this is when resentment towards MatPat started to hit a boiling point. That April, a thread on Out of the Loop asked why so many people disliked him. Generally, users felt his channel declined in quality and he sold out to milk the cash cow that was Five Nights at Freddy's. Some of the backlash stemmed from FNAF's popularity in general. Others simply felt the show had lost its roots and was too reliant on what was trending. He has shifted from applying real-world physics to video games to videos that are very speculation-heavy, in which he tries to rewrite canon and seem to be an attempt to appeal to a wider, younger audience. On top of just going with whatever game has a crazy big fandom for the next 15 minutes. Game theory had been dominating the algorithm for years, and so at this point there was a growing sense of exhaustion towards his content from the YouTube community at large. You can't blame Matt for doing this though, since he was just following what would get him views, as if any of these Redditors would reject making millions of extra dollars to avoid some snarky comments. Funnily enough, the top comment on the Reddit post cites the Pyro is gay theory as the channel at its best, showing that people have been saying game theory used to be good since its inception. It didn't help that a month later, Matt announced GameLab, his high-budget YouTube Red series focused on testing video game logic in real life. Despite being inaccessible unless you paid, these uploads showed up in their feed, cementing many's view of him as part of the establishment. That being said, people who didn't have access to GameLab weren't missing out on much. I remember there was an episode about some random YouTubers trying to recreate Mirror's Edge in real life, which in practice meant watching some shitty parkour. More egregious, however, was the launch of Deadlock, a show intended to reflect debates within the gaming community. The first episode compared Overwatch and Team Fortress 2 on the premise, "Is newer always better?" While the concept certainly had potential, the execution was heavily criticized. Rather than offering insight, it amounted to a surface-level debate that satisfied neither fans of Overwatch or Team Fortress 2. Viewers questioned if the debaters ever even played TF2, making broad, sweeping statements like Overwatch has higher mobility and skill ceiling.
Plus, in a time when gamers are more accepting than ever to play different characters, Overwatch embraces diversity. While the characters in TF2 may be from all across the world, outside of the Demo Man and maybe the Pyro, they're all white males.
They even straight up use screenshots from a completely different game. This character is not from TF2. It was so out of touch both player bases trashed it as poorly researched. Later episodes had special guests, including former Nintendo of America president Reggie Fils-Aimé. But the fact is, more often than not, they had people representing sides they weren't invested in. If they didn't actually care, one was left to conclude the series only existed for cynical reasons. The entire Deadlock series is very clearly designed to rack up as many views as possible, without contributing anything of value to the discussion. Even high-profile TF2 YouTubers left comments on the video. I'm now 100% convinced neither of these guys have played TF2 for more than 5 minutes. Strangely, these comments disappeared, leading fans to repost that exchange message over and over while accusing him of deleting criticism. MatPat would address this directly in an unlisted video made specifically for Reddit.
And off to the side here, you can see I can remove this comment. So that means I have not removed it. I have the option to remove it. I can also flag it, hide the user, any of those things. But this shows you that this is, proof positive evidence that I'm not going and deleting comments.
All of this hate would pale in comparison to a video he would soon create about another indie darling of the era. Undertale is an indie role-playing game created by Toby Fox and released in September of 2015. What began as a modest, crowd-funded project quickly became a cultural phenomenon, taking the internet by storm. It subverted traditional RPG conventions by allowing players to complete it without killing a single enemy. Its characters, hidden lore, and multiple endings fueled fan theories and online discussion. For months it felt nearly inescapable across YouTube, Tumblr, and gaming forums. Unsurprisingly, it wasn't long until Matt got requests to cover Undertale on Game Theory. So in February of 2016, he made his first video about the series, claiming to have found Sans' secret identity. The video explores deep connections between the indie RPG and Earthbound, which wasn't exactly a secret. But he took it a step further by claiming the character Sans was actually Ness from Earthbound under a secret identity. Specifically, he claimed it was Ness from an Earthbound ROM hack Toby made when he was 17. This was immediately rejected by the fanbase on its face for how ridiculous it was. It must be understood that Sans is shrouded in mystery, with many clues hinting toward a backstory not explained. After waiting so long for Matt to delve into the lore just as he did for FNAF, it felt like a slap in the face that he instead focused on this absurd, blatantly non-canonical premise. Even Toby Fox himself weighed in on Twitter stating, "Fan theories are fun, but I feel embarrassed whenever someone calls attention to something I did when I was 16. I guess I should just accept bad ROM hack with swears as part of my eternal legacy." This reaction may in part be due to the fact that one of the characters in his ROM hack used the slur for gay people that we're not allowed to say anymore, rather than hating the hypothesis itself. Regardless, shortly after the video was released, the theory got mocked and widely ridiculed online. Sans' Ness became a meme, spawning a countless amount of edits, remixes, and even fan art. It became a staple of the popular Twitter account Game Theory Rejects. There was a popular derivative jokingly claiming that Sans was actually Steven from Steven Universe. This evolved into a fanfic where Steven got cancer, died, and became a skeleton named Sans, an acronym for Steven After Not Surviving. Despite the hate, the original Game Theory episode has amassed over 14 million views, so Matt was laughing all the way to the bank. While most of the Sans' Ness memes were in good fun, there was a significant amount of genuine backlash toward Game Theory. In the original video, MatPat announced another theory on Undertale lore, as well as an episode of Deadlock about it. But due to the first theory's overwhelmingly negative reception, these plans were scrapped. Still, this wouldn't be the last run-in with the fandom that year. In May of 2016, MatPat and 10 other YouTube personalities were invited for a meeting with Pope Francis in Vatican City. They discussed how to use their influence on the internet to bring people of different nationalities and cultures together. Because it's customary to give His Holiness a gift, Matt made a peculiar decision to give him a copy of Undertale of all things. Now at the time, it's worth mentioning Undertale had no physical release. Instead, he brought with him the code for a Steam key. This was all revealed in a video he uploaded on July 5th explaining his decision.
But lastly, I gave the Pope this game because it speaks his language. This year is his self-proclaimed Year of Mercy for the Catholic Church, a period celebrating forgiveness and compassion when one could otherwise choose to harm a person. And what's the recurring theme throughout Undertale? Mercy.
This revelation was a bombshell that exploded on social media. Yet again, he was the subject of widespread scrutiny. Some felt it was tone-deaf and inappropriate, viewing Undertale as just another one of those trendy games. They argued he wasted the Pope's time talking about some flavor of the week indie thing. I also remember people saying the Pope couldn't use technology, meaning he couldn't even play it. While he did state earlier that year he didn't know how to work a computer, he was noted for embracing technology and calling the internet a gift from God. Of course, it still seemed unlikely he'd go so far as to make a Steam account just to activate the code. Another controversial aspect was his decision to invoke two recent tragedies as to why what he did was so important.
But in all seriousness, considering the tragic circumstances around both Christina Grimmie and Orlando, it's an even more important topic now than it was just a few weeks ago, and I feel it merits making a video.
It reminds me of that tragedy.
This resulted in some truly schizo comments looking back at them. How dare you? How dare you use Orlando? How f***ing dare you use my home state? You treat these horrible tragedies not as what they are, but as theory fodder for your shitty videos. You do not care about what happened or the lives that were lost. Jesus Christ. On the other hand, Toby Fox had a much more level-headed reaction. Apparently MatPat met Pope Francis and gave him Undertale as a symbolic gift. I'm honored. MatPat addressed the backlash a year later in what became his final videos about Undertale. He explained that the sheer amount of backlash dissuaded him from making more content about the game, calling them some of the worst experiences he had in his 6 years of doing the show.
Welcome to Game Theory, where, deep breath, I think I'm finally ready to tackle Undertale again. But overly dramatic game theory voice aside, I gotta be honest with you, I'm scared of this game.
While normally he'd stay quiet and ignore the hate, it felt necessary given the comments would be inevitably flooded like before. He took this opportunity to level with viewers, stating outright these videos weren't meant to be treated as fact and he was trying to have fun. Sans' Nest, for instance, was a means to talk about two of his favorite video games.
Now, don't get me wrong, did I in any way think that this was canon lore to the series? No. Of course not, I didn't think that Sans is actually Ness, but at the end of the day, these are theories meant to get you to think about things from a different perspective. But the overwhelming negativity and ridicule that that video got was just crushing. It sucked, man. And don't get me wrong, I have gotten used to dealing with internet hate over the years. I've gotten through the Sonic is Slow controversy. I've had literal petitions written to remove me from the internet for slandering Mario's name by calling him a sociopath, but this one hurt.
But this paled in comparison to the outrage over his gift to the Pope, much of which relied on assumptions or misinfo. The first thing he corrected was over what their conversation entailed.
Let me address some of the misconceptions and errors that were leveled against me when I first released that video. 1, I talked to the Pope about cyberbullying in schools. I did not, as many people wrongfully accuse me of, waste his time talking to him about video games or gamer problems.
Next, he reiterated that the gift was symbolic and not under the belief the Pope would literally play the game, although that is a funny thought. He then pointed out that the other YouTubers had brought things without receiving backlash.
If you thought that the gift of a video game was bad and had problems with that one, at least it was better than a surfboard, an illegal tree, and a YouTuber's self-written book about themselves. All things that the Pope also received as gifts that day.
Finally, he emphasized that Undertale was special and not just any other game about peace. The occasion was supposed to be something they'd all celebrate, an achievement as a theorist community.
I know a lot of people were upset that I was selected, and I'm sorry if you don't like me. But as someone who tries to advocate for science, logic, and critical thought, I did my best to put a good foot forward for all 3 of those different categories. And you know what? I did my best.
While many were sympathetic, this didn't stop the widespread ridicule over Sans' Nest and giving Pope Undertale. It is worth mentioning that over time, the criticism has eased up. Undertale has proven itself through its longevity to truly be something special, which has vindicated his particular choice of gift. In 2022, at a weekly general audience, Megalovania played on speakers at the Vatican while Pope Francis was present. Though it's not clear if he had anything to do with that decision, it's an interesting coincidence to say the least. It's been so long that newer fans of the game are in disbelief that people were even seriously mad at MatPat over this. You just had to be there. It would be a long time until that shift in perception, sadly. In the meantime, Matt continued to cover Five Nights at Freddy's with his supposed final theory a year later. Obviously, that wasn't the case, as the franchise and his analysis continued for years. Scott once again replied, stating, "This was a very satisfying and important episode of game theory. They became things that I felt I needed to answer with the new game, but now some of those things have been answered by MatPat." By that point, Game Theory had made 15 episodes about the animatronic horror game, far more than any other series he's covered. Viewers observed the channel was changing and had much less variety in terms of subject matter. 2017 brought forth the adpocalypse, when major brands pulled out due to their ads being shown next to extremist content. It coincided with the Vine invasion, when influencers like Jake and Logan Paul first transitioned over to YouTube. MatPat was cognizant of these changes, making several videos on the topic. He and Steph also began streaming frequently. This brings us to when I, the Gamer from Mars, came into the picture. Okay, so all the way back in 2017, I started a new series on this channel called What Happened To, where I looked into what once popular YouTubers were up to. While most of these were about creators who had fallen into irrelevancy, that wasn't always the case. In fact, that August, I would end up making a video about MatPat discussing my view on why his channel changed from years past. While many correctly surmised Five Nights at Freddy's had something to do with it, I felt like not many people were pointing out that his channel had begun to appeal to children. After all, MatPat is a smart guy and perceptive of the site's direction and trends. If he wanted to keep growing the brand amidst the ad boycott, it only made sense to appeal to the larger, more profitable demo. As a contemporary of his, since I also was making gaming theory content in 2011 and 2012 on YouTube, it was a stark contrast to the old days when he'd use scantily clad women in his thumbnails. I received significant backlash for pointing this out, as well as for making fun of his cringy tweets. You see, that year his Twitter account began posting at a noticeably higher frequency, recycling unoriginal jokes, inspirational quotes, and constant references to being an introvert. The shift in tone and volume suggested the account was likely being managed by someone else, who relied on spamming what I now like to call relatability slop.
I'm not antisocial, I'm just pro-solitude. When nothing goes right, take a left. Yesterday I wanted a burrito. Today I'm eating a burrito. Follow your dreams. #motivation. It's cute how they call them missed calls and not avoided calls.
A week after my video, I noticed the Game Theory channel uploaded a video also titled What Happened to Game Theory. I didn't know what to think of it at the time because the idea of it being done in direct response to me felt like a reach, though it would line up since my video had performed well and was actually beating out Game Theory in some search results. Well, 2 weeks later, Matt and Steph would actually react to my video on stream, accusing me of being a hater in the title. Now, I was far from the only quote-unquote hater they discussed. Several YouTubers such as Manga, Common, Optimus, and Wavy Websurf also made videos discussing drama around their channel. But given they spent an hour watching my video, uploaded an edited version focused on me, and even gave it the same title, What Happened to MatPat, I think it's fair to say this stream was mainly directed at me. Throughout the video, they seem rather defensive over the assertion that they were milking Five Nights at Freddy's, and that such content appeals to young children.
If you look, we've done a fair amount of Five Nights at Freddy's coverage.
We've done almost 200 theories.
But we've done 200 episodes, and I think like FNAF is
15? Maybe, if that?
Maybe like 15 of those?
To prove their audience skewed older than most gaming channels, they pulled up their analytics. Personally, I'm still not convinced, as these metrics are notoriously inaccurate. They don't include anyone under 13, and kids often lie about their age when making an account. Also, that 15 out of 200 figure was misleading about how many videos they made about Freddy's, as most of those were made before FNAF's existence. It would have been more accurate to look at how many of their videos were about the game after it was released. Mind you, I never said in my video that either of these things were bad, so it was surprising to me that they took it so negatively. But I do understand why it might be uncomfortable to acknowledge their use of half-naked women for clickbait early on. From his earlier videos where he always had scantily clad women in the thumbnails to try to get more clicks.
We should probably talk about that. The very early episode on fake boobs in gaming. The actual experiment of that boobs video was, hey, if we do an episode about boobs, will it get like 8 times the amount of views? The reason why boobs were in those episodes was clickbait.
This quickly starts getting weird as they keep harping on that point, with MatPat flat out saying that he has never looked at porn before.
I've actually never looked at porn.
Neither have I, MatPat, neither have I. He goes on to dispute my theory that he had a new person running his Twitter account, stating he wrote all of those tweets himself, which I'll take his word on. At the time, it really confused me that they bothered to respond at all because I didn't see my video as that critical, rather just talking about some changes I saw and laughing at a few tweets he had written. Now that I'm making this video, I can see he responded to feedback much more over the years than I realized. It probably didn't help that my original video got over 800,000 views, and for a while it was the first thing that showed up when you searched the term MatPat on YouTube. Because of this, I got lumped in with his actual insane haters, which I've learned a lot more about looking into this video. But to give an update almost a decade later, the beef has long since been squashed, and I even went to see the Broadway show he produced, where we got to hang out for a little bit and discuss musicals. Good time. Moving on, an up-and-coming theory and analysis channel from around this same time period was Inside a Mind, run by Jamie C. Foster. His content was often compared favorably to MatPat's by viewers. Well, that November, Jamie uploaded a video explaining how he almost worked for Game Theory. In it, Jamie explained that as part of the audition, he wrote a script about the ending of Gravity Falls. However, after finishing the theory, he was ghosted with no explanation. This firstly revealed Matt used ghostwriters, which wasn't common knowledge at the time. Secondly, Jamie also shared screenshots of their email exchange showing what writers were being instructed to do. You control the story. Don't feel like you have to talk about everything. Focus on the strongest evidence and brush aside some of the weaker moments or parts that may contradict what you're trying to prove. For a good example, look at the Mario's Mental series of videos. I really focus in on that shoe grinding moment and avoid all mention of the good things Mario has done throughout the series. In that way, I'm able to direct viewer focus to what is going to be most compelling for the overall story I'm trying to tell. This was interpreted as Matt instructing them to intentionally cherry-pick information to steer the narrative. As he continued to agitate fan bases by covering their favorite games and misrepresenting their stories, this would be treated like a smoking gun. The video was privated after Matt left an apology, explaining he had reached out to many potential writers, and since Jamie submitted late, his script got lost in the shuffle. The video he wrote did eventually get made, and given the call-out is now lost media, it's safe to say this matter was also resolved. Jumping forward a year, the only major controversy I could find from 2018 about MatPat was him making a "my gender is an attack helicopter" joke, which he apologized for after a coworker informed him of its history. He also got criticized for using fan art without permission. Matt owned up to this, apologized to the uncredited artist, and vowed to be more strict over what images his editors use. Unfortunately for Matt, 2019 wouldn't be as forgiving.
You heard this guy worked at Blizzard? Oh man, did you read that in a Reddit thread?
Heartbound is an unfinished indie RPG developed by Jason Thor Hall, better known online as Pirate Software. Though Pirate Software lives in internet infamy today, primarily for a stance against stop killing games, there was once a time when Thor was widely respected online. His game, despite being unfinished, had amassed a small but loyal following. It stood to gain even more publicity when MatPat decided to stream it to his audience on January 2nd, 2019. Given its clear influence from Undertale and the fact viewers wouldn't be familiar with it, he decided to name the VOD "The Next Undertale Game Is Here, Heartbound Game Release." It actually was his second time streaming the game, first previewing the demo 2 years prior and calling it the best game since Undertale. Despite this exposure and glowing praise, Thor would take issue with their framing, writing the following call-out on Twitter.
Hey MatPat, I'm pretty disappointed here and so is our community. Your recent GT Live came across as an Undertale clickbait mashup instead of being about Heartbound. You never linked to our game and you got our studio name wrong as well.
Attached were screenshots showing there were more tags relating to Undertale and its sequel than Heartbound itself. This resulted in a massive wave of backlash. To many, it felt unfair to the aspiring indie game dev to not judge the game on its own merits. That, on top of his inadequate promo in the description, led to claims he was being exploitative. In response, MatPat wrote a series of tweets defending his decision that it wasn't intended to be disrespectful. First, I don't review the thumbnail tag's description prior to live streams going up anymore. That's handled by 2 members of our team. However, I trained them, so their decisions are on me. That said, their goal is to make live streams as searchable as possible. Your game is great, and by relating it to something similar that our audience already knows and enjoys, we're hoping to introduce them to it. Regarding links, we don't tend to link back to the games we're playing. That's not an intentional slight on you, it's just rarely something we do for games that aren't fan-made or free. We'll talk about having a more standard policy around that. That last tweet would lead Toby Fox himself to chime in, standing up for pirate software. You should link to any game you play. Creators need all the help they can get, and think carefully if you're misleading your audience with how you present your videos. You went too far this time! With the creator of Undertale on his side and the internet already poised to dislike MatPat's, the public was overwhelmingly of the belief that he did something wrong. Yet even at the time, I felt this whole thing was unwarranted and unnecessarily petty, which I had made a video about. I mean, they did get the name of the game studio wrong, which could have used a correction, but many of the other points against the stream kinda just come off as, well, really petty. The one thing people were complaining about was how the tags of the video mention Undertale, which I guess they're claiming would confuse people into thinking Heartbound was related to that franchise. But that makes no sense. Tags have been hidden from general public view for years now, so the idea that this metadata confused people is absolute grade A nonsense. It was clearly clickbait, no doubt, but I have trouble believing people that watched the stream actually thought that this was a sequel. But if they only read the original title, I can see where they're coming from on this point. The weirdest point against the stream, I think, is that people were mad that there wasn't a link to purchase the game in the description. I've been on YouTube for a decade now and can verify that this has never been a standard practice, so going after only game theory for it is dumb. After being dislike bombed for making a video that was supposedly unflattering to MatPat's, I was once again dislike bombed, this time for defending him over idiotic complaints. Obviously, in retrospect, I'm sure people would be forgiving toward MatPat given how much public opinion on pirate software has soured. Let's be honest, the main sell of his game was its surface-level similarity to Earthbound and Undertale. Heck, the name Heartbound is a one-letter anagram from Earthbound. And all these years later, the game is not out and probably never will be. But this wasn't the only controversy Matt would find himself in that week. In fact, the very next day after all this drama, fellow YouTuber and copyright lawyer Legal posted a video alleging MatPat may have plagiarized his content. What needs to be understood is that at the time, Epic Games was being sued by Alfonso Ribeiro of the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air fame over their use of the Carlton dance as an emote. Whether a dance can be copyrighted did not have a clear-cut answer at the time, which is precisely why the topic lent itself to legal analysis. Legal posted his video on December 22, 2018. Game Theory's episode was released 8 days later on December 30th. Given the research, scripting, recording, and editing required for a Game Theory episode, the claim that it was written within the 8-day window seems unlikely. Regardless, Legal identified 4 overlapping points. The first was a brief overview of copyright history, including the fact that choreographic works were explicitly protected under the 1976 Copyright Act. These are foundational facts readily available in any discussion of the subject. The second concerned language in the legislative history, clarifying that choreographic works do not include social dance steps or simple routines. This wording originates from Congress and has been cited in legal commentary predating both videos. The third example involved the principle that uncopyrightable elements can combine to form a protectable work.
A song is always going to be made up of non-copyrightable notes to form a melody, so just because there are constituent parts that might not be copyrightable, sometimes when you add those things together, you can create an individual work that is original on its own, or sometimes they qualify as a compilation.
Copywriting an individual move, like the moonwalk, would be like the equivalent of granting ownership over an individual word or musical note. All of these things are building blocks to a complete book, or a full song, or a fully choreographed dance.
This is more arguable, but I'd still contend it's a concept intrinsic to the topic. The reason I bring all this up is because legal topics can funnel researchers towards the same commentary, so some overlap is inevitable. Still, the specific analogy structure is rhetorically similar, so I'll give him that. MatPat responded to Legal Eagle's claim swiftly, posting a lengthy response on both Twitter and in the comments of said video. He stated his episode was written and researched well before Legal Eagle's coverage and offered to show the creator proof. It's also worth noting Matt also consulted with a lawyer to help him with his script, giving more credence to the idea it was simply a matter of parallel thinking. It's disappointing to see that you as a respected professional in your field would jump to conclusions based purely off of circumstantial evidence. Telling your audience I ripped off your video instead of addressing this to me in a private forum first and asking for my stance. Unlike the Heartbound incident, viewers seemed to mostly side with MatPat once he defended himself. Legal Eagle would eventually unlist the video and the two patched things up later on. In fact, he'd even call upon Legal Eagle for help in a 2022 food theory about Mr. Beast. This was far from the only plagiarism claim MatPat would face in his career. Over the years, he was accused of lifting theories from users on Tumblr or Reddit without credit numerous times. It's unfair to say Matt never gave credit. He made a conscious effort to in videos and on stream many times. But it rubbed people the wrong way whenever he took ownership of an idea that had been floating around the internet for years. He did get better about this, perhaps in response to the criticism.
And while we're thanking people, a very special shout out to Reddit and Tumblr theorist Dreamfisher for single-handedly putting Bendy and the Ink Machine back on my radar with some really fascinating observations.
Following this, the MatPat hate started to cool down, but there was one skirmish that would eventually hit after a video about Hermitcraft in 2021. Hermitcraft is a long-running invite-only Minecraft server. It is widely considered the oldest active SMP on YouTube. A fan known as Della, or Meister2012, has written a detailed post outlining the series' lore and predicting where the story might go next. Because of this, Della accused the team at Game Theory of using their research without credit when they made a video on the subject. The Hermitcraft community quickly rallied around them. Matthew responded on October 24th, stating the episode had primarily been written by co-writer Tom Robinson. Both denied intentionally copying anyone's theory, arguing that the similarities were coincidental and the result of two longtime fans drawing the same conclusions. The following is an excerpt of Tom's response as provided by MatPat. I've been a fan of Hermitcraft since Season 1. I watched as Jeff told Pungence about the gold, and it always struck me as odd that it never wrapped up. I continued watching through the years as the community grew. I love the stories that were given to this one-off character that had been lost to time. MatPat vouched for Tom, noting his commitment to research and that he'd been there since the beginning of Hermitcraft to witness those obscure moments. Yet Tom's own explanation states that he only started connecting the dots after the idea was suggested to him by Matt. I've been watching since Season 1 suggests long-term organic theorizing. Matt asked me to look into it suggests the theory crystallized after being prompted. Matt also says it wasn't until working for Game Theory that he learned to start looking at video descriptions, which raises concerns about the depth of their prior independent analysis. While Matt is right that things like this happen sometimes, even his example isn't really applicable. Having two videos come out on the same day is not the same as presenting the same info as one of the only sources published 2 months earlier. Dell acknowledged it was possible to reach the same conclusions independently, but pointed to a few discrepancies that raised red flags. Firstly, the video almost entirely consisted of points found in the original post. If someone deeply familiar with the lore independently constructed a theory, we would expect them to reference contextual details beyond what's in the Tumblr post. Their absence raises doubt about the depth of his engagement. The few changes they did make, often rewording, suggested inaccuracies, suggesting they didn't understand the lore enough to infer beyond what was spelled out explicitly. I'll say up front, I'm not an expert on Hermitcraft's story myself, so I can't make a conclusive judgment call here. However, Asuma, the YouTuber and server admin at the center of this in-game storyline, publicly disavowed Game Theory's video.
When I saw that video at first I was quite excited, and then I started to see similarity after similarity, and I know they put out a statement about plagiarism in terms of this other person's post, and like the amount of similarities is really specific and just a little, I'd say, unfavorable. So I'm not trying to make a big deal or drama about it, I'm just gonna let that be.
It worked out for Game Theory in the end though, as this episode now sits at over 6 million views. But it continues to leave a bad taste among those who found their initial response insufficient. I don't want to make it sound like everyone was going for Matt's jugular during this era, as there were moments of support from the greater online community. An example of this is when MatPat released a video addressing the collapse of Defy Media, one of his former employers and the multi-channel network that he ran his AdSense revenue through. He revealed that the company still owed him and the other creators a combined total of $1.7 million following its shutdown.
2018 was the hardest year in my life, and I don't mean that in the way a YouTuber stubs their toe and suddenly says, "Oh my gosh, I almost died." I actually mean that 2018 was the year filled with the highest of highs, but also the lowest of lows that I've ever experienced in my, 31, 32 years of existence. Collectively, us 50 had $1.7 million stolen from us. $1.7 million stolen from 50 people. And if that wasn't bad enough, in my case, it was taken by someone who I thought I knew.
Matt used the moment to criticize the MCN model more broadly, revealing these companies had exploited YouTubers for years. The tone was noticeably different from his usual presentation. He was frustrated, direct, and openly cynical. Many creators and media outlets amplify the story, and several class action lawsuits followed, though ultimately there were no meaningful consequences for those responsible, as bankruptcy shields liability from owners. It coincided with the shutdown of another MCN, Machinima, in which they pulled down 15 years of community-wide content. For many viewers, the Defy Media situation marked a turning point. It complicated the narrative that MatPat was simply corporate aligned. Here he positioned himself firmly on the side of creators at a time when tensions between platforms and corporations were escalating. In the years that followed, public sentiment around Game Theory softened. The channel had long been criticized for inaccuracies, overreach, or sensational framing, but eventually, as the internet grew larger, audiences started treating MatPat's creation as what it always meant to be: speculative entertainment. Meanwhile, theorist media expanded to include the food theorists and the style theorists, eventually amassing over 44 million subscribers across its network. In December of 2022, MatPat and Stephanie sold Theorist Media to LunarX, a company focused on investing in digital-first content teams. He continued hosting for 2 more years, during which he shared what he called his definitive FNAF timeline. These later-stage Five Nights at Freddy's videos were increasingly rejected by the game's fanbase. A particularly notorious example was when he said the character Gregory was a robot. It became so infamous that they acknowledged the backlash on the channel.
To be fair, that was both of our sin, but you know.
I threw something out, my first FNAF theory, I threw something out
Yeah, Gregory's a robot, first FNAF theory, and look how well received it's been.
Despite this, it still went on to become a popular theory, frustrating those who disagreed further. The second to last video MatPat made about the series addressed those growing critical of his theories directly. The video begins by reading hate comments, including some directed toward other channels, to show this trend wasn't unique to Game Theory. He seems genuinely upset.
Matt's theorizing has gone downhill at this point. His latest FNAF theories are lazy, proper research is not being done. He's clearly running out of material. I'm genuinely wondering if he's even passionate about this franchise anymore. There is a difference between telling theories and straight up telling misinformation. Harsh, right?
This wasn't the first time he had made a direct plea to the community. In 2018, he wrote a lengthy post on the Five Nights at Freddy's subreddit, explaining they were all on the same side. But this time he stood his ground, reiterating Gregory being a robot was a valid theory. He then compared it to his upload about the fourth game back in the day when he said it all took place in a dream.
They hated it, because honestly, I was dismissing 4 games of story and beloved characters with the whole, oh, it was all just a dream trope. Honestly, I didn't love it either, but it felt like where the evidence was largely pointing at the time. And yet, it's only now, all these years later, that the sentiment has finally changed on that theory, and people largely agree that Dream Theory was right at the time, and that Scott just pivoted the story later with Sister Location.
The reception to this video outside YouTube was mixed. Critics felt it failed to address the bigger issues people had with their work, which after all these years were still the inaccuracies and leaving out contradictory context. I feel like I'm starting to sound like a broken record. Obviously, by then, the official Five Nights at Freddy's storyline had proven to be just as convoluted and arbitrary as the fan theories. But the criticism still carried over to all their videos. The Hollow Knight community, for example, made a point-by-point list of everything factually wrong with his episode about the game. And nowadays, even Game Theory's own viewers will admit most of their recent output falls apart under any amount of scrutiny. What theory makes a lot of sense when one of the hosts explains it, but when you do some digging yourself, realize they left out some key details that disprove it? The Last Pomni theory, but that doesn't really count because it didn't make any sense when even thinking about it slightly. Like, they even straight up lied at some points. Given it was ultimately MatPat's second to last video on the franchise, one could interpret this as being more for their writer's sake than his. At the end of the day, they could all agree no one deserved to be harassed over it, and overall this response had a positive effect on his image. When the Five Nights at Freddy's movie premiered later that year, he appeared in a brief cameo, a symbolic full-circle moment for a franchise that had defined much of his career.
Hey, welcome to Sparky's. Could I set you folks up with some appetizers?
This brings us to January 9th, 2024, when Matt announced he would be retiring later that year. He cited a desire to spend more time with his family as he had been hosting 4 channels at the same time. It's an emotional 25-minute video where he reflects on his journey, the memories he had made on the channel, and thanking his viewers for making it all possible.
Because of this whole transition, I've been thinking a lot about my time on these channels and the evolution that we've gone to together. In the beginning, right, I was kind of like the edgy older brother where I would talk about like, oh, did you know that Link is dead? And let's make some boob jokes. And then at a certain point, I evolved into Dad Pat, right? I became a little bit more mature. I had the team around me. I had to be more careful about who I was saying was dead on a regular basis.
Rather than disappear abruptly, he structured his departure as the final 10 theories, revisiting games like Minecraft, Deltarune, and Hello Neighbor. Notably, his coverage of Hello Neighbor acknowledged a long-running meme from 2020, when the devs publicly begged him to cover their title. I believe MatPat is going to enjoy this. I think MatPat will enjoy dissecting this frame by frame. Yes, MatPat, you should totally reply to our DM.
For this video, I'm working with a charity who are dedicated to finding out if MatPat ever responded to the Hello Neighbor Twitter account.
And yes, after 5 years, half a decade, he finally explained why he didn't respond to their DM.
When these tweets initially came out, part of the reason I didn't respond was for exactly this reason. I had my hands full with the FNAF books and didn't have time to catch up on all the extra outside media that was being made for this particular franchise.
Matt seemed more unfiltered, occasionally critiquing the increasing reliance on external lore and expanded media within franchises like FNAF.
It used to be that the games were completely solvable just from the games alone. Sure, you might be able to find some extra cool information on Scott's website or a cryptic line from a single book, but the game was all you really needed, and it then left you with some dangling threads to theorize about in future games. Now, any theory that gets made stops being a theory and becomes more of a recap of the last few books that nobody bothered to read, which just isn't interesting.
Naturally, in seeing through his departure, there was a lot of nostalgia over all the memories they had made on the channel. This final run of videos included shooting tanks with the boys, reuniting all the original game theorists who used to have shows on the channel.
Come on in, guys. Hey,
let's go.
I see you literally every day.
I know. However, it's been 6 years.
His 9th upload was a final goodbye to Five Nights at Freddy's, reflecting on its impact on the wider internet and the community that grew alongside it. Then on March 9th, 2024, MatPat's stepped down as host of the 4 main theory channels. The final video launched with the website where'smatpat.com as a way to stay connected with fans after his retirement. So far, it's been used to tease projects like his alternate reality game disguised as a lo-fi channel called Lorify. And even though he was no longer the face of game theory, he made it clear he was not leaving the creator space entirely. That became evident when on June 5th, 2025, Matt and Stephanie announced the launch of the Bipartisan Creator Economy Caucus in the US House of Representatives, aimed at helping lawmakers better understand digital creators and online business models. They held a press conference with both Democratic and Republican legislators outside the United States Capitol. These photos of MatPat at Capitol Hill circulated with claims he would eventually be running for president. For what their actual goals were, though, Matt honestly seems like the perfect guy for the job. In interviews later that year, Matt revealed he had been considered as an expert witness for a congressional committee, but was ultimately not selected, allegedly because he was viewed as too bipartisan. Pointing out creator rights as an issue that transcends party lines, he described frustration with political systems that prioritize partisanship over education. He also spoke about their new event, Creators in Fashion, which recently partnered with the conference VidSummit. MatPat's most recent appearance wouldn't be in front of the camera, instead providing the voice for Toy Bonnie in the second Five Nights at Freddy's movie. And with that, we reach the present day and the end of this story so far. It seems unlikely, even with his retirement, that this will be the last we'll ever see of Matthew Patrick. With his plans to advocate for creators in the US government, he clearly isn't going to spend his well-earned retirement totally inactive. Matt has also returned on the channels to make brief cameos, but according to a podcast appearance from June of 2025, at this point they are hardly involved.
How involved in Theorists are you still, I suppose?
Not really.
Oh, you're really not anymore?
Really not.
Wow.
Every once in a while, they'll call us up and ask us a question, but it's very rare, and more it's like, hey, we check in with the team because we're friends.
And we do advisory calls like once a quarter.
MatPat has since been replaced with the new head and COO of Theorist Media being Kevin DeGaulle. Mr. DeGaulle has previously worked for Universal and NBC. Something that got overlooked during his retirement is that Jason Parker, the previous COO since 2013, also left the company, meaning there has been a significant change in management, even more than most viewers realized. So where are the Theorist Media channels today now that both the new hosts and viewers have had 2 years to adjust? Well, views are down across the board, but that's somewhat to be expected. Looking through their subreddit, there have been multiple threads about the subject. While many are clearly afraid of offending the new hosts, their consensus is that the new direction feels far more corporate. Some are quick to point out that this started well before MatPat retired, which is true. But as one user notes, Matt was the unifying presence of the brand. For many, the channels were less about the theories themselves and more how much they enjoyed watching MatPat specifically. As one person put it, the problem is they're trying to be like MatPat. That's literally what they train to do. But they're just not MatPat. I would much rather they try to be themselves and put their own unique flair on it. Still, others felt there was a noticeable decline in quality. Yes, the days of tangential learning had long since passed, but these new videos rarely talked about anything except lore. The formula for game theory has changed entirely. Game theory used to be about the science in video games, and that's what I loved. Now it's lore about games that are chasing the prestige of FNAF, and it's FNAF itself again. Old school game theory didn't matter if you played the game or not, because it wasn't about lore, but about video game physics and such. The channel's topics going forward are also likely going to be limited exclusively to mainstream games, which makes sense financially, but doesn't inspire faith that they're talking about things they're passionate about. Film theory has faced similar criticism. In their videos about Steven Universe, which the host Lee claims to have watched in its entirety, he gets basic plot points wrong. As in, a detail so integral to the story there is no way to finish the show without realizing. Again, when your focus is on the story yet you still get things about it wrong, it begs the question of what anyone would get out of watching these videos. Another commonly cited example is their theory about Arcane, which is flooded with comments correcting them on various mistakes. You didn't know the lore. It is riddled with incorrect statements. This feels like if a guy who watched 5 Necrit videos on Shuffle was forced to make a League lore video. Seriously, you had plenty of time to do proper research since the Arcane hype isn't going anywhere soon. Ruthlessly incorrect in certain sections, but hey, good to finally see the Theorist channel acknowledging League lore. This issue has been levied against all their channels, but mainly Game Theory and Film Theory. So far, Food Theory's host Santi has been able to carve out his own niche, partially due to his real-life experiments which give it a Mythbusters quality. Style Theory, while niche, does have its defenders as a fashion blog, and generally people like Ash, the current host of GT Live. Another point that has made the brand feel more corporate is how they approach sponsors. In the past, it was common for episodes to get brand deals, but it didn't feel invasive to the content. In contrast, take How Expensive Are the Lego Movies? While the topic was praised for being in line with classic film theory, the video is plagued by the sponsor being mentioned over and over and over again.
Sponsored by Bamboo Lab, which is actually why I was super hyped when Bamboo Lab reached out wanting to partner for a video. And we'll have to do all of that while trying to beat this Bamboo 3D printer before it's done. Like, the basic filaments that Bamboo sells pretty much cost all the same no matter what the color is. I mean this in all sincerity when I say that that sort of cash would be better spent investing in one of Bamboo Lab's printers because of all the crazy awesome stuff you can make with it.
Bro accidentally talked about Lego Movie in his Bamboo Lab video. Now, it may seem like after laying all of this out that everyone in the fanbase had turned on them, but that's not the case. The channel still do get a fair amount of views, and I'm sure there are people who do genuinely like the new hosts. However, there is also a sect of the community that is extremely defensive of them, not because they sincerely like them, no, it's because hating on them would mean you're not a true fan. If MatPat picked them, they don't suck. You just don't like them because they aren't him. That's not loyal. It's kind of making me lose a little faith in the fandom. The care comes from the fact that to keep saying I want MatPat back is akin to a toddler throwing a tantrum every 2 seconds because it didn't get a specific toy. It's also a borderline hate comment at this point because you're telling the new host that they are horrible at their job and should just go away and make MatPat the host for everything again. Do you understand how hurtful that is? To be completely fair, I do think people are forgetting that Game Theory was on this trajectory for a long time. Really, you could trace it all the way back to the Five Nights at Freddy's content in 2015 as when the shift from science to mysterious lore began. As many defenders will point out, many of these people have been working on the channel for years behind the scenes as writers and producers. It was easier to suspend disbelief when it was all being narrated by one guy. Once that was lost, people started to realize how the sausage was made. I think this comment by user Senator Based puts it well. I feel as if MatPat, in his quest to chase trends and crack the YouTube code, built such a sturdy, reliable, predictable, sanitized, and ultimately blemishless infrastructure that when he left, nothing even really changed. And it was done so slowly that the Game Theorist became a YouTuber ship of thesis, slowly replacing itself with a machine built to cater to an algorithm, so much so that you could literally remove the main guy behind the whole thing and plug in new human beings and nothing would ultimately change. I love Game Theory and it will always hold a special place in my heart, but it had evolved into something else long before MatPat retired. In conclusion, it's interesting looking back at all these controversies and how much public opinion shifted over time. I think an understated factor in all this is that all those kids who grew up watching MatPat back in the day are now adults, and unlike a lot of other YouTubers they grew up with, he has largely stayed the same person they remembered him as, with the drama being a forgotten side note. Matt's biggest sin really was being too successful. I find that when you become #1 as he did, people will use you as the face for any grievances they see in the greater community. I also stand by the idea that Mr. Patrick's theater kid upbeat persona didn't help when responding to criticism people had, but really he handled his rise to fame better than any other YouTuber from this era. And because of this, a lot of the people that would hate on game theory back in the day now complain that the show isn't as good anymore since he left. Funny how that happens sometimes.